if you're thinking about this as, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. It might just be like 2008, 2009. We go through it. We have this V-shaped recovery, and it's kind of business as usual. I'm not
Yeah.
worried about it. I'm just going to buy the dip. You don't understand that this is a whole new animal.
I'm Lynette Zang, Chief Market Analyst here at ITM Trading, a full-service physical gold and silver dealer specializing in custom strategies to help you survive and thrive the reset that frankly has already begun. And I would like to welcome you to this edition of Coffee with Lynette with our I'm so excited about this guest today, George Gammon. He is a macro addict and he is brilliant. He's an American real estate investor and entrepreneur. He retired early, so he knows how to find advantages and to find opportunities in crisis. His YouTube channel has over 66,000 subscribers and growing very rapidly, and his videos are designed to build wealth and help you thrive in a world of economic insanity. And quite frankly, things are pretty darn insane these days. I am so excited to have him here. I know this is going to be a fabulous interview. So without further ado, George, I am so glad that you're here today. And, I really wanted you to come because our last conversation that we had on your channel, you're so bright, you're so spot on, and everybody, all of our viewers really need to hear what you have to say about what really is the crisis that we're dealing with here. This is crazy.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I appreciate the kind words, Lynette. I don't know if, my father always said I was a legend in my own mind. So I don't, I don't, I don't want people to think I'm not that great, but I definitely obsess over this stuff, and I really enjoy talking about it. And hopefully, if I can provide an insight every once in a while, then I'm doing my job.
Well, I would say that you're doing your job very well if that's all you're looking for. But if you haven't visited George's site, you need to. All the links are below. And let's just jump right into it because we're right in the middle of this coronavirus erupting as a pandemic globally. But what do you see as the real problem here?
Well, the real problem is that we're in the everything bubble. And so that has so many systemic risks. And I think to be clear, I have no proof of this, but it would make sense to me that we're not getting correct information. They're not testing like they should. I'm talking about they in the United States, just because they know how precarious the U.S. economy is. And so if we didn't have all of these asset bubbles that have been created by the Federal Reserve, I think they'd be doing more testing. I think they'd be more honest, the World Health Organization, in really what's going on specifically in the United States. But I think that they're just they've got this counterbalance between do you really tell the truth and risk economic collapse? Or do you just kind of try to sweep it under the rug, hopefully no one notices because we're not testing, and then try to prevent what they know is, they might know that they might not think that it's inevitable, but I think that people like you and I that pay attention to that stuff it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Yes, and I would say that that's really always been the truth, because if people actually understood how money was created and supported in the system, and therefore what you're working for, what you're trying to save, what you're trying to invest, that they would say no. So I would say that that's the same kind of thing that's been part of their playbook forever, but it doesn't look like it's really working anymore. I mean, look what happened. The whole world, all the markets, I should say, were waiting for what the G7, that's the group of the largest global economies, that they came together with a firepower. And when
Right.
Powell came out and did a 50 basis point cut, saying that it was a preventative measure because the US economy is so strong, it was really interesting to watch the reaction with the markets going straight up, but then look at what's happened since.
Yeah, I think last time I checked, it's down 400 or 450 points, and that's with a 50-point basis or 50 basis 50 basis point cut.
Right.
And my goodness, so where my mind goes next is that we've assumed over the last 12 years that the Fed has control to a certain degree over the markets. And the U.S. economy has become so financialized that it's really not the market being a reflection of the economy, but the economy being propped up by the markets. So since the Fed has had control over the markets through lowering of interest rates and quantitative easing, everything works out, and we all sleep well at night knowing that if anything happens, if we go down by 10, 15, 20%, the Fed can just come right in with their put, and then it's right back to the races. The problem with that is that if the Fed does one of these rate cuts or tries to prop up the market through the rate cuts or quantitative easing, and it doesn't work, and then what do you do? Because the only tools that the Fed has at its disposal is just money printing and lowering interest rates. So if those are your only two tools and they don't work, and the market says, you know what, we're sick and tired of this money printing, it's not going to work this time, the coronavirus or XYZ is more powerful, we're more worried about the coronavirus than we are optimistic about the money printing propping up the markets. When that tidal wave takes over the money printing and their only tools, then how does the market stay up? Then it goes back to the market's got to trade on the underlying fundamentals.
Right.
And as you know, being a market participant and expert for as long as you have been, the delta between the fundamentals and where the market's trading right now is absolutely massive. And I would guess that if we actually traded down to call it a 15 PE ratio, I'd assume that's the historic average. You know better than I would.
Mm-hmm.
Going from a 30 PE on the CAPE ratio down to a 15, I mean, does that take us down to 15,000 on the Dow? Take us down to 1,000, maybe under on the S&P? And then what does that do to the economy? Because the economy has been so financialized, like I said earlier, and is so propped up by financial assets. It's this daisy chain reaction. And I think it might have started today at 10 o'clock Eastern time when the Fed dropped and the market just said, you know what, we're still going down.
Right, exactly. And any con game requires confidence. So you have to have confidence that, I mean, what can the Federal Reserve do about this anyway? But when they drop those rates 50 basis points, that means they used up more of their bullets, and they don't have that many left. I think they're between on the Fed funds rate 125 and 150. Well, how do you go below zero? The EU has tried it, even though the president wants us to go negative, and I'm certain we are going to go negative. But I think that the negative rate debt has ballooned back up to like 16 trillion. And what is all of that telling you? That's telling you crisis. Powell came out and said we're doing it to, just we don't really need it. The economy, the U.S. economy is so strong. So we're only doing it to prevent something, except that anytime they've done it at this large a level, it has been because we've been in a crisis. You think it's going to prevent the economy from slowing?
Yeah, I want to. Yeah, I think you brought up some great points right there. The first thing that I'd like to address is the Fed and their rationale for doing this. And so they'll come out and say, well, we're doing this to, just a buffer, just to put in kind of a safety net there. But they're only dropping interest rates from 1.5% down to 1%. So, I mean, is anybody, especially with the coronavirus out there, where you don't want to send your kid to school? I've seen all these long lines at Costco and Sam's Clubs to stock up on groceries. I've seen a lot of clips on Twitter where people are on flights where they're literally the only person on the plane. Like,
wow.
it's just them. They've got the whole plane to themselves. So is this 50 basis point cut really going to have an effect on that type of psychology? And the answer, I think, has got to be no. So that takes them down to zero. I think you get the same thing. And then you could say, well, but they could always do quantitative easing. And this is the second point that I wanted to address. But let's not forget that they've basically been doing quantitative easing since September 17th when they had the repo blow up. So they've been purchasing 50 to 60 billion worth of treasuries since that repo blow up. That's basically quantitative easing.
Yes.
So if they come in, what do they do from there? So say they're buying 60 billion a month right now. Do they take that up to 100? Do they take that up to 200? Maybe, but it's the same story, that if they do that and at some point the market says, you know what, we're just not playing this game anymore, and regardless of how much QE or how much you want to expand your balance sheet, we're still going down, then there's no more safety net, there's no more Fed put, and you've got the market still at its second highest valuation. I read a tweet by a gal that I follow on Twitter. She's fantastic. She's on Real Vision all the time. Her name is Stephanie Pomboy, and she made the point after the Friday morning, after we had that horrible week, that the market was still extremely overvalued when you look at the market cap relative to GDP, which is a fantastic chart that I'd really suggest all your viewers checking out. But you can see that in all these times when, like the early 80s as an example, just to give it some context, the market cap to GDP was about 30% or so. As of recently, we've gone over, I think it's 150%. And just because we had that drop last week of, call it 12%, we're still at like 140. And you compare that to when stocks were actually cheap, and then you can see how much downside we actually have. I don't know. I mean, you would know this a lot better than I would, but I would guess that we've got at least 50% of downside if the market doesn't respond to what the Fed is doing.
Yeah, but you know what really has me concerned? Because inside of all of this, remember, next year, they may change their minds after this, but they're getting rid of LIBOR. So the system itself is dying into this. And my concern is not as much if the markets keep going down, though that could maybe wake some people up. My concern is because I think we're in the melt-up part of this phase, when all of these global central bankers just print all of that money. It has to go someplace, and it's going to go in a targeted way. So, what we're seeing right now is a loss of confidence. But when they all turn those money printing spigots on, and we see the markets going back up and straight up to the moon, people will cheer if they're not living through a crisis themselves. They'll cheer because the markets look like they're going higher. But the piece that they'll be missing is that the value of that currency, it's lost all value.
Right.
And it doesn't have very much anyway. And then when they lop off those zeros, like we saw in Venezuela, market goes from here, best performing market, 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, until boom, when they just lopped off. Exactly.
Yeah, it can go up in nominal terms, but still go down in real terms, as can housing, all asset prices can. I think that's what you're referring to. It
exactly.
It's a situation where I don't know how, I have done a couple videos this week, and I've put out some tweets where and I think this is the best way that I can describe it. It's the way I see it in my mind. And that is that the Federal Reserve and the government is on one side. You have this battle going on. And the battle is the Federal Reserve and the government versus reality. And so, today you chalk one up for reality, in the sense that the market went down even though the Fed came out and tried to create more confidence by dropping those interest rates. I saw also this morning, I tweeted out that Japan is considering postponing the Olympics as a result of the coronavirus. That would be another point for reality. So, I'm assuming Trump is going to come out today, or they're going to do something to try to talk up these markets and provide that confidence that you talk about all the time. But I think that's the last piece of the puzzle. And if the government and the Fed lose that battle and reality wins, then it goes back to what I was saying earlier. I don't see how the markets recover from that. And then a lot of it is predicated upon how bad this coronavirus gets. I think it's a lot worse in the United States. They're just not testing. And hopefully it slows down, and when we get to the summer months, I'm assuming that it will. But if it doesn't, then we've got some even bigger problems. And if it does, maybe that confidence goes back over to the Fed and the government, and that money printing actually does prop up the markets. There's just a lot of moving pieces right now.
Yeah, there are a lot of moving pieces. But, it's been really interesting just to watch this unfold, because last week I had said, okay, next week we're going to look at what all the different central bankers are doing. And it is the World Bank with the IMF saying we're going to do whatever it takes. It is the EU. It is the Bank of Japan. It is China. Everybody is saying we will do whatever it takes. And what I'd really like people to see is look at their own lives. And at any point when they said to themselves, we will do at all cost, is really where it is. I will make this happen at all cost. The cost is typically extremely dear and not really worth that.
And the cost is usually the currency, to your point.
Exactly. And part of what I've been I went through the OECD report. I went through an IMF report. So I've been reading a lot of the reports that are coming out. And they're starting to talk about basically helicopter money. They didn't say helicopter money, but, people... There are some that have recouped since the crisis that hit in 2008, but the reality is the system died. So if you've got 42% of the population that can't come up with $400 in an emergency, my bet is they are the working poor. And if they aren't working, they aren't getting paid. So, that's really where they're not going in to buy the stock market. So I do think we can see the stock market rising like we have in Venezuela, right?
Yeah, right.
Best market, but the economy is in shambles.
Yeah, I think it's great for your viewers if we unpack what you just said a little bit further.
Please.
When you're talking about the ECB and the Bank of Japan doing whatever it takes. I'm sure those are their words.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, that's great, but what can you do? Like the Bank of Japan as an example. I don't even understand where they're going with that. Like who are they trying to kid? They're already negative. They've already bought 80% of the ETFs. They basically own the bond market.
What the stock market.
Yeah. What are you going to do? You own every single asset. And then the only other option is the MMT option, and just helicopter money. And then just hoping that works. I think that would work a lot better. And you got to define work. I think that would create more inflation in the U.S. than it would Japan. But I think we're going to get to a point here. We could, especially if the coronavirus continues to expand and get worse, that they're backed up into a corner where they're at the zero bound or even negative. They're doing as much quantitative easing as they can do, and it's still not working. And then it's just a Hail Mary with MMT, because that's the only thing that they can possibly do that they haven't already tried. And then it's a really interesting thought experiment to say, well, will it work? Because right now there's the financial economy and the real economy, and there's a defined line that it's very hard for that money to get from the financial economy over into the real economy, because your transfer mechanism are the commercial banks themselves. And if they're not lending, or if there's no demand for loans, then that money, no matter how much reserves are parked at the Fed, we could have 1.5 trillion in excess reserves. That won't matter for the real economy. You won't get the increase in the velocity that's needed to increase inflation, to at least get interest rates up, or to do something to make this seem like the economy is moving in the right direction. So how, if they can get over that line in the sand and get that money or those reserves somehow into the real economy, do people spend it? Do they hoard it? I mean, going back to 2008, 2009, when we got into the depths of the recession, people weren't out there spending money frivolously. They were actually drawing down debt. They were paying down debt. They were improving their balance sheet. So if we have helicopter money, and instead of going out just spending it wildly at the movie theater or buying a new car, people actually pay off their debt, which decreases the money supply, decreases velocity, and improve their balance sheet, then maybe that doesn't work either.
Well, I'm thinking the MMT, so that is just that helicopter money where they're just putting money into the hands of anybody that might spend it. So these are lower income people. But, how much debt can somebody that is, in a pure service sector? I mean, we have destroyed our middle class. We have destroyed our foundation. And all of these things that are happening right now is really a big test. It's a test to the ETFs, which have risen dramatically. And an ETF is a derivative since the financial crisis, and it permeates everything. And the huge swings that we're seeing in these markets, 1,000-point swings or more, are really all about the algorithms.
Yeah, I agree. And also, I had an interview the other day with Grant Williams.
Yes, I saw that. It was excellent.
Yeah, he's just incredible.
He is.
And he brought up a fantastic point that since we've been in the longest expansion of in U.S. history over the past, call it 12 years, it's created this unique environment where the market participants, a lot of the market participants, really have never seen a downturn. And if you think back, going back to the last crisis that we had starting in 2007, okay, but we were only about 6 or 7 years removed from the dot-com bust. So, okay, it's kind of fresh in people's memory. And then you go back, then you had the S&L crisis, and then you had long-term capital management blow up, and you had all these things, then going back to our last conversation in 87 with Black Monday. So you have these periodic things that happen, let's say 5-6 years apart, but then all of a sudden we go 12 years, you have this recency bias, then a larger percentage of those market participants are maybe these younger people that only know one thing, and that's buy the dip.
Exactly.
That's the only strategy that you need, is buy the dip, and you're going to be golden. And as you and I,
because of the central banks propping the markets up, pushing them up.
Yeah, they might not even connect those dots. They just know that, and I'm talking about more retail investors. Like you and I are active on YouTube, so I watch a lot of these videos from YouTube, call them experts, that are on investing and whatnot, and every single one of them, well, for the most part, says the same thing, and that's that every time the market goes down, it's your buying opportunity. So the market just went down by 1,000 points today. Well, that's a great opportunity to go in and buy Tesla. That's a great opportunity to go in and buy Uber or something like that. It's a gift. This is a Christmas gift come early, because we know, then this is, of course, their words, not mine. We know that the market over time always goes up. Over time, and it's this mentality that's bizarre to me, because what they do is they go back to 1981, and they only look at the last 40 years when we've been in a down cycle of interest rates, and then just
Exactly.
extrapolate that out for the next 400 years, as though, and then they don't look at 1925 or 1929 to 1981, where if you look at the market in those years adjusted for inflation, the market's flat.
Right.
It's totally flat, and then it just becomes a matter of timing, when you got in, when you didn't. And and then another example of this I like to use is Japan, and that why is the United States stock market exclusive? Like why is it so special? Why can't we be like Japan? If we can do QE for the next 20 years and keep interest rates at zero, why can't our stock market go from an all-time high down 50% and never recover? Why can't our housing market do that? Because that's exactly what happened in Japan. People that use Japan as a reference point, they always like to cherry pick whatever data they want to use. They say, oh, the Fed can do QE forever because Japan did it. The Fed can take interest rates negative forever because Japan did it. But then they forget about what I was just saying about the markets going down by 50%. So that's another big, I don't want to call it a black swan, but another variable out there that Grant pointed out that I think we really need to think about is look at the market participants and the algorithms. To your point, you've got algorithms, you've got people that have just been buying the dip and will continue to do that and have been doing that over the last 12 years. And you've got the pension funds that have gone further and further out the risk curve because they can't get yield anywhere else, right? Yep. And then you add that to the fact where people have gone from active management almost exclusively into passive management. And these ETFs that, to your point, are a derivative. And I mean,
well,
enough said.
Enough said. But, this is what's bringing us into this new financial system. And a lot of my work is based upon being able to make those educated choices, because their goal is to stay in power. They've created this mess, and they want to continue to create this mess. What I've also seen over the last maybe month-ish or so ago are central banks now coming out and asking the public, well, what do you want us to be like? What should we do? I mean, it's because
they... Yeah.
Oh my God, when I see that, it's like, if I could reach through and throttle these people, because they've done such a bad job of it by design. And you really have to wonder, do they realize how much damage they're really doing to the normal person? Or do they just live in the numbers that they juggle and create and shift and massage so that it looks like they want it to look?
Personally, I think they just live in a world of models. And that's the only, I would hate to think that they're malicious in their intent. I don't know, but I would let's give them the benefit of the doubt.
I'll do that.
Okay, you can do that for me.
I'll do that. Because here's the other piece. If you look around the world, what do we hear about employment? These are the lowest levels in 30 years and 50 years. Everybody is employed that wants to be employed. And I don't care whether you're looking at the US or the UK or the EU or Japan or China. Everybody's got that same song. And so the consumer is so strong. But if 42% of the population can't come up with $400, right, and with those debts rising more and more, so lowering the interest rate to inspire more debt taking on more debt. I mean,
they're pushing on a string. They're pushing on a string. Yeah, they've pulled as much demand forward from the future as they possibly can, and it's interesting because you've got so many of these scenarios that could play out, whether it's inflation, whether it's an inflationary depression,
right?
Like we were talking about before.
That's what I think it's going to look like.
Whether it's just the CPI going up, whether it's just you have the CPI going up while you have asset prices in total deflation. Could you see just outright deflation? It's just this Rubik's Cube that's always changing. One thing I wanted to mention, though, going back to the unemployment rate, because that's the hat that the mainstream always kind of puts, that they throw out there is saying, oh,
Right.
well, of course the economy is amazing because we've got the lowest unemployment rate of all time.
Exactly.
But the unemployment rate is very similar to the CPI in the sense that if they adjusted it the same way that they did back in the 1970s and back in the 1980s, it would be much, much higher. If
Yes.
it's call it 3.5% right now, if they adjusted it the same way, it would be closer to 6 or 7%. So it really kind
Or
of
maybe even 10.
maybe closer to 10. Yeah. I mean, if you look at the CPI, you look at shadow stats, and
Right.
that's up there around 10%, close to where we had it in the 1970s. And I think inflation is a very tough thing to pin down because it all depends on what you spend your money on. And unfortunately, when you look at the stuff that rich people spend their money on, as far as the majority of the money that they actually do spend, it's really not on things that have gone up that much in price. But when you get down to the middle class and the poor people, well, the stuff that they spend 95% of their income on has gone up dramatically in price. So it just goes back to what you're saying. One thing, though, I want to point out, because if you look at what's going on right now, last week, the coronavirus, and what we've been talking about today, it looks really, really bad. And I don't see how they navigate their way out of this unless they get a rapid cure for the coronavirus or the hot weather knocks it out, something like that. But I want to point out an opportunity. I did a video yesterday. And as stock prices go down, I'm not suggesting anyone buy right now, not even close, because like Stephanie said, it's still at ridiculous
Severely
valuations.
overvalued, yeah.
But what I'm doing personally is I'm just starting a watch list on saying, okay, if the market went down by 50% from where it is today, what would I like to own? And what would be interesting? What would I like to buy as far as a dividend? This doesn't necessarily apply specifically to the United States, but all over the world. And if you have that global view, I think you have a huge advantage. But that's what I've done. Assuming that you've got gold as an insurance policy, and for a speculation, I like the miners, and I like some other plays like that. But for me personally, I like to have the bulk of my portfolio in investments, and how I define that is something that would pay me to own it. So whether that's a rental property or a dividend-paying stock. And again, I want to be clear. I'm not suggesting that anyone buy right now, but I am suggesting maybe starting a watch list, and that's maybe a way that I could put a positive spin on our conversation here.
Actually, I was going to talk to you about that because you did do a video on finding opportunities in crisis. And the strategy that we execute here is also about finding those opportunities. And if you're in the right place at the right time with the right asset, the right money, then you can take advantage of them. So it's more the patterns, right? And that's why I talk about the patterns all the time. I mean, frankly, as a next stockbroker, I have a very high level of comfort with stocks, but I also understand when they are really out of whack.
Right.
So, I'm going to wait until the garbage shakes out, because can you even tell me right now? I think I could be off on this. Obviously, I don't have it in front of me. But if I remember correctly, 1 in 4 companies on the exchange are classified as zombie companies. I could be off by that. I'll research it, and I'll pull that data up and look. But what that means is that they aren't even making enough income to cover their debt or interest payments. So they're borrowing money to service that debt. You really have to do your due diligence.
Yeah, and now you're talking about the corporate bond market as well.
Correct.
And oh my gosh, that's probably the biggest bubble waiting to go. But I really like what you say about gold. I've heard a few of your videos where you talk about maybe stockpiling some gold as an insurance policy. Then if we do get this inflation, I mean, you could potentially pay off your mortgage.
Exactly.
With who knows, an ounce of gold. I don't know.
Who knows? Maybe a tenth.
Inflation we get, as long as it's fixed rate, you got
it. Exactly. And actually, the historic average is 25 ounces of gold or the equivalent would buy an entire city block, buildings and all.
Huh. Wow.
Right. So Absolutely, because when they reset the system, and that's what, for me, that's what this black swan event, this does look like the black swan. We'll
Yeah.
see, but it does look like it, because basically you have China shut down right now, and I don't know if they could come up with a rapid enough movement for that. But
Yeah.
all of those property prices, stock prices, you let all the garbage shake out, there are going to be many that do not make it, because this is about leverage. But then those opportunities, and when they do that reset, they revalue the gold. So what's up here is overvalued right now, and down here with the gold and silver that are undervalued, well, that flip-flops.
Yeah.
Then,
And the great thing about gold and silver is it's extremely liquid. And
exactly.
so it's like keeping dry powder. For people who like to hold their money in cash, or just, however much of that portfolio it is, I say that if you really want dry powder and you don't want to touch your gold, which I don't suggest doing, you go into just short-term T-bills, like maybe a 3-month T-bill. Just keep rolling it over so you don't have a lot of risk there. But I want to have a
Yeah.
caveat to that if interest rates continue to go down, and we could get to a point where the whole yield curve is potentially negative,
Right.
then your dry powder, you really want not only your insurance, but I would say your dry powder, you want that in gold as well, because it really flip-flops then. And a lot of people have assets that on paper look great right now, and they say, oh, I don't have a problem if the market goes down by 20% or 50%,
Right.
I can go ahead and liquidate this asset. I can sell my house. I can take out an equity line of credit against a rental property, whatever it is. But they don't realize, and I know this from experience, because I started investing in real estate in 2012, right at the bottom of the market, and that's when real estate, no one wanted to touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Yep.
And I had pristine credit. I was a great credit risk, and I couldn't get a loan from the bank. They wouldn't even, anything involving real estate, there's just no way they would not do it. And so my point with that is that no matter how bad it gets with this coronavirus or anything else, any other black swan, you know that your gold and silver, you're going to be able to liquidate that and take that money or whatever it is and turn it into an asset that you might want to buy at that point in time. It's just an asset swap on your balance sheet, but gold gives you that optionality, that liquidity optionality that other assets it doesn't give you. But I think I'm preaching to the choir here.
Well, you are, and I couldn't have said it better myself. So thank you, really. Thank you so much. Because you're absolutely right. I mean, that's what it is. You just want to get out of the way, let whatever's going to happen, because we can't stop it. But I do also feel so strongly that we need to have the food, the water, the energy,
Yeah, right.
the security, that barterability, wealth preservation, and community. If this is indeed the Black Swan event, I was talking to somebody yesterday, and she has a little plot in the community garden.
Yeah.
And she's learning how. She says, I was really never much of a gardener, but I'm really learning how to do that now. So for anybody that's out there, there are community gardens all over the place. Make sure that you can secure your food, because, you saw what happened when you go to these big box stores or the grocery store. If people aren't panicking, when they do, boom, it can go away like that. Because
Yeah,
most
and
people don't have a store of food.
that's right. And this is a whole different type of panic that we
Right.
could face in the United States. We think of panic as 2008 or 2009, but that's not a good comparison, because we didn't have any supply shocks back then,
Right.
like we could potentially have now with what's going on with the coronavirus. So
Exactly.
I mean, I see all these videos. I have friends of mine from all over the world texting me saying, I just went to the grocery store to try to stock up on XYZ, and it's just out. I remember one guy texted me a picture of the pasta aisle at his grocery store.
Oh, wow.
Completely
Interesting.
sold out. Completely sold out. And that's just people preparing for something.
Right.
If it actually does hit the United States, like it did in China, or maybe still is, or South Korea, Italy, Iran, any of these places, you're not only going to have that supply shock from a standpoint of people going out and just buying everything in sight because they're preparing, but also because they cannot fill those shelves because there's nothing coming in. Most people don't realize that 50% of the supply chains in the world start with China. And not to mention the pharmaceuticals. I read something, and I don't know if this is accurate or not, but I read something the other day saying that 90% of the original ingredients for pharmaceuticals or drugs for the world comes from China. So even if, and my point is, that's nothing that the United States has ever seen before. Maybe in the Great Depression, but it's definitely not something that we saw in 2007, 2008. So if you're thinking about this as, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. It might just be like 2008, 2009. We go through it. We have this V-shaped recovery, and it's kind of business as usual. I'm not worried about it. I'm just going to buy the dip. You don't understand that this is a whole new animal. This is not what we saw in 2007, 2008. I hope it's not as bad, but it could potentially be a hell of a lot worse.
Oh, it is quite possible. And Megan has a lot of people that know her. Megan, what year were you in? What hurricane?
Katrina.
In Katrina?
Oh, Katrina. Yeah, right? There you go. That's a good example.
It's a great example. And can you share your experience a little bit? Loud enough so people can hear?
Well, with Katrina, when we knew the hurricane was coming,
she was in Miami. She was in Miami at that time.
So obviously a lot of like stocking up, but then the aftermath was even worse because we didn't have electricity for 3 weeks. So there was no perishable food. Gas was being rationed because even though we didn't have power, a lot of the infrastructure was still pretty bad, but we still had to go to work. So we still had to use our cars, and we needed gas to get there. We needed gas to get places, because it's like business as usual, even though it's not business as usual. So I waited in gas ration lines, and it was worse, much worse after the hurricane than it was before. And we were still feeling the effects before the hurricane.
Yeah, that's my point. Exactly. Right on the money. And so I think it goes back to what you're saying and what you've been preaching for so long is you not only have the gold, not only think smart about your investments, but also be wise about your personal life in the same way. Maybe grow some of your own food, maybe do some of these things that you're looking pretty smart right now, Lynette.
Thank you so much. Well, here's the thing. I actually believe my research. You know.
There you go. And you're practicing it as well. So you're good to go. We could have this thing come through Phoenix, and you're just going to go right out to your backyard and get some more of that sugarcane lemonade or whatever.
Yes, that sugarcane juice.
Watch it all go by.
Yeah, well, and hopefully also, be able to share. Actually, here, can you hand me a bag? Well, I brought a whole bunch of produce in today. So
from your
to
garden?
share.
Is that from your garden?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Okay,
Jeez.
so and eggs and things like that. So yeah, nice good greens that I'm going to be sharing with others in the office and taking over to donate. So yeah,
wow,
I definitely practice.
Cool.
Yeah, I definitely practice what I preach. But I think everybody needs to be able to do that on some level. Maybe not the way I have, but one of my favorite suggestions, honestly, is to get some really good broccoli sprouting seeds. Because you rinse them off 3 days, you have live food that is super nutritious. So if you're going to be limited on your food, that is a great way to provide nutrition for your body. Not very expensive, doesn't take up a lot of space. Probably not, people aren't thinking about that at the grocery store when they're, buying stuff off the shelf. And it's got a great long shelf life. So.
Yeah. Well, that sounds great. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on what you're actually looking at for the rest of this week as far as the markets. Like, what are you paying most attention to? What do you think is the most important thing that we can focus on to really take that information and be able to leverage it to maybe prepare ourselves better from a financial standpoint?
I say you got to look at the interest rates.
Yeah.
It isn't just the inversions, but you've got the 10-year. I don't know where it is at the moment, but it was just a hair above 1%. So the central banks are out of the dry powder, but globally there's a lot more inversions that's happening, and that's really and the bond market is a much bigger market, and that
Yeah.
bond bubble is a much bigger bubble. So,
Yeah.
but I hate to say this piece. You know, you never let a good crisis go to waste. What have we got going on here? We've got the LIBOR ending next year. We've got the problem with all of the retirees. You know, people retiring, they don't have money to retire. So,
Yeah.
and they've been shifting the risk. I mean, that's one thing that I've been watching so closely and showing people over time since 2008, how they propped up the markets to give the elite a chance to get out of harm's way. And it's just like all the government bonds. Who's really been buying the lion's share of them? The pension plans.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the biggest bubble that there is. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I really hate to say this, but this crisis could justify the shift into the next monetary system.
Yeah, because you've got the demographic issue there as well, with the majority of the baby boomers retiring right about now. So they're taking their money out of risk assets, they're spending it, or they're using that for their consumption. And so that takes one of the buyers out of the markets. And then going back to the pension funds, if they can't get a return, then what are they going to do? Well, in order to meet their obligations, they're going to try to increase taxes, most likely property taxes. But people forget that what happens, what's the main driver of tax revenue as a percentage of GDP? It would be a recession, and it's the market. People think that it's tax rates. It's not. It has nothing to do with it. If you look at tax rates going back to the 1950s or 40s or whenever you want to, you'll see that it's always hovered right around, in the modern era, and I would say after the Depression, it's hovered right around 18% of GDP. And that doesn't matter whether the highest marginal rate's 90% or 25%. It's always right around there. So what happens, though, when it does dip down, that's a result of a recession. So, and you can see that happen dramatically played out in 2008, 2009. So if you think about the fact that the government right now is running $1 trillion deficits, over $1 trillion, and that's when we're supposed to have the greatest economy of all time. So if we have a huge recession, something even worse or as bad as 2008, 2009, then the deficits are going to go to the moon. I mean, I read something that Gunlock came out with the other day that right around 5% or the deficits are running right around 5% of GDP right now. But in the last recession, they got up to 10% of GDP. Well, if that goes up to, let's call it 15%, at the same time, when they meaning the government and the pension funds need tax revenues the most, the tax revenues will be plummeting.
Right.
So that, I think that's another component that people need to look at and understand, and I don't think a lot of people are really understanding that, especially a lot of these state workers that are in areas like New Jersey, in Illinois, California. And another problem that I think people have, even if they live in a state where they think their pension is funded, they'll pull up a chart or they'll pull up some sort of projections and they'll say, oh yeah, those guys in California are screwed, or any of the states I just mentioned. And yet you're right that they are a lot more screwed. But what you don't understand is, even if you're saying that even if the numbers are showing that your pension is, call it 80% funded, they're still using that 7% number on a moving forward basis. Well, how does that 7% number play out when now interest rates are potentially going negative, and we know that'll make it even harder for the pension funds to make money, and the insurance company and the banks? So I get worked up here, but what really, and as well as I do, the banks, the retail banks at least, are trying to make money by borrowing short, lending long. And I had a discussion with Jeff Snyder the other day where he kind of set me straight on that's not really too much what they do now as far as the majority of their profits, but that's still kind of the model for the community bank. Well, if we've got a flat yield curve or an inverted yield curve for an extended time, well, then how do they make money? And if they can't make money by retail lending, then how do we transfer all of the money that's being printed in the financial economy? How do we transfer that over to the real economy to get it into the hands of the people that will spend it, that might actually boost the economy or boost inflation, get things going in the right direction? They're not going to be able to do it if the transfer mechanism continues to be the banks because of their own policies.
Right. Well, that's been shifting too. And I know we have another discussion coming up, because I want to talk to you also about what they're doing right now to start to attempt to stimulate investment into the stock market for the little guys, because they need them to prop that up. But we've covered so much today, and I think this is really important stuff, and I cannot thank you enough. I wish we could go on and on and on, but I cannot thank you enough for coming here today. You're so brilliant, and it's just a joy to have a conversation with you.
No problem, Lynette. I always enjoy it, and I can't wait to do it again.
We will do it very soon. We have lots more things to talk about, and it's so interesting. Who knows what's going to happen day to day? But you can all rest assured that both of us will be here. Definitely, if you haven't gone to George's channel, the links are below. Follow him. He's brilliant. I love him, and thank you so much. Keep in mind that financial shields are made of physical metal. Definitely not papers or promises. And until next we meet, please be safe out there. Thank you, George. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.